a very important show. It's an exciting story. It's a dramatic story. And you know this person very well if you live in the States because you see her on television all the time. And she is an inspiration. So all of you who are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs, this is your show because our job is to inspire you to keep going, especially if you're stuck in the mud right now, which all entrepreneurs get stuck in. Any comments, Kim?
Well, this is going to be a very inspirational show, and especially, too, for women out there. If you're thinking about starting a business or you have a business, our guest is a fabulous role model for women in the world of business as well as just a role model for women, period. And I'm loving her story. The more I find out about her, the more I love somebody that started from nothing, really, and built up a multi-million-dollar business. It's a very exciting story. So let's get started.
So our guest today is Angie Hicks. She's the co-founder and current CMO of Angie's List. You see her on if you're in America, you see her on television on time. And she is an inspiration to anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. And the topic today is finding a need and providing a solution. But most importantly, for those of you who have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and the Cash Flow Quadrant, many entrepreneurs go from employee to S, to small entrepreneur. Very few make the transition from S to B, which is big entrepreneur, 500 employees or more. So for those of you who are stuck in the S, S stands for struggle. Anyway, if you're stuck there, please listen up. So welcome to the program, Angie.
Welcome, Angie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Would you tell us a story, how you got started?
Yeah, because I think most people think of Angie's List who know of Angie's List. It's an online, it's an internet company, but you didn't start there.
We did not. So Angie's List has been around over 20 years. So Bill Osterley, my co-founder, and I started it in 1995. It was actually right when I graduated from college. Bill and I met while I was in college. I was his intern, and he was struggling to find good home improvement contractors. And we really thought there should be a better way for consumers to get reliable information about the people they're hiring to do work around their home.
So you're fresh out of college and you're an overnight success. Is that correct? There was no pain or gain in the whole thing.
There's no pain, right? Exactly. Like, here we are.
You just one day woke up, I have an idea. And that was it. The money poured in. Is that correct?
Maybe not quite so rosy as that might appear.
But it's amazing how many people think that's the way it works.
Yeah.
They're delusional.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, they hear the stories and they don't really hear the stories of kind of what it's like in the early days of starting a business, because it's hard, it's lonely. There are times when it's not where you're certain it's not going to work. And I've always been a firm believer that perseverance is probably one of the biggest necessary traits of an entrepreneur, because there will be times that you think, we can't, this isn't going to go, I can't do this any longer. And oftentimes that happens right before you get a little break.
Right. And you actually started knocking on doors, right? You started door to door.
I did. So, I was a very, quiet, shy 22-year-old that, and we did not have a marketing plan. We were actually, we copied Angie's List off of a little company that had been around since the early 70s in Indianapolis called Unified Neighbors, and they'd never expanded outside of Indianapolis. And it was a good little business, and Bill used that to renovate a house in Indiana. And they built their entire membership base off of going door to door. But that was in the 70s, when door to door was probably a lot more welcoming than in the mid 90s.
Did you get a few rejections?
Quite a few. I look back on it now as my character building experience more than my sales experience, but we quickly realized that probably wasn't how we were going to be able to scale this business.
I always laugh because, Angie, I have this friend of mine, he's a PhD, which stands for Poor, Helpless, and Desperate. And I asked him one day, I said, what would happen if you lost your job? He says, I'll just start a business. I went, what?
Yeah.
What? This guy has no idea. Congratulations from going from startup to small business to big business to world power. So as you say, it was character building. Would you mind sharing events or things or times where you came up against the wall? You say, that's it. I'm not going to do this.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was, so if we roll back the clock back to 1995, I mean, I was working by myself. Bill had a full-time job that he did. So this was my gig. And so I was living in a city I didn't know because I was from Indiana and moved to Ohio, working by myself. And I'd spend, during the day I would take calls. It was pre-internet days. I would take calls from members looking for different types of home improvement experts. And then in the evening I'd go out and sell memberships. I literally would measure my sales like, one membership or two memberships a day would be a good day. And it's hard to, kind of get up and do that over and over again. So without getting like, where are we going at $19 a year or whatever it was we were charging back then? That was going to take a long time before we actually had any traction at that pace.
Did you eat at McDonald's a lot?
I did. I lived in a little tiny studio apartment that I think I paid like $200 a month for back then. Yeah. Everything was tiny in it, and it was not the most desirable place in the world.
So Angie's List literally was a list that you wrote out, and you took the calls yourself. So you said sometimes and one of the things we talk about this makes a successful big business is being able to scalability, being able to grow it. So what was the turning point that took you from on the phone to your next step?
Sure. So it was probably in the late 90s. So we had opened, as we were progressing kind of those first few years, we opened a market a year. So we expanded to Charlotte and Cleveland, and we got 4 or 5 cities open. And then we realized that we were, in order to be able to we actually had this kind of decision point. The question became like, it's very hard to scale the way we're scaling because we were actually opening offices in every city. Because we thought kind of understanding local required that you actually were part of the community, that you actually sat in there and knew that the dry cleaner sat behind the grocery store at the corner of whatever, that you actually had to have that kind of context. But we knew being able to scale from a data perspective and then to be able to put a website up, we were going to have to centralize that data. And it was like, okay, how do we do that? And so we opted to roll everything centrally into our central call center. And I think I'm trying to think back what we literally gave ourselves, I don't know, maybe 30 or 60 days to kind of prove that we could do that centrally before we were going to revert on that. And it was challenging. It was challenging for sure, but then that allowed us to be able to put a website up and really see our growth start to scale.
Well, let me ask you this: how much was a membership for the the door you knocked on?
I think it was $19 a year.
And
we were 19.
And you funded yourself starting with $19 per member?
Yeah.
Was that the only source of revenue?
So we had revenue. We have 2 streams of revenue. We then and today have 2 streams of revenue. So there was the membership revenue, and then companies who were highly rated by the consumers could offer discount coupons to the members. And so back in those days, in the early days, it was actually through our newsletter that we mailed. They would have a coupon ad in our newsletter, but they had to maintain their good ratings in order to be eligible to advertise.
And then did you have to hire employees? I mean, to go from Ohio to Charlotte, it's quite a knock on the door.
Yeah. Yeah, we sure did. So we actually, after a year in, ended up acquiring Unified Neighbors, which was the business we patterned Angie's List after in Indianapolis. And so literally I was like stuck I have to hire people to take the phone calls because I was actually driving back and forth and spending half my week in each city. So I put, a little ad out in doors? By that point, luckily, we had decided that knocking on the doors was not the right path. So we had actually started doing some advertising. So we were advertising in the local, Columbus was full of great local newspapers, weekly newspapers. So we had a little ad that we ran in those that got our phone ringing, and it said, "Tired of lousy service." And it was an ad that kind of stuck with us for a long time. And so all of a sudden our phones started ringing, and our 1s and 2s a day sales turned into 5 and 10 a day sale.
So off of $19, and then how did you get revenue from a coupon?
From coupon advertising. So I'd buy advertising in our newsletter, our print newsletter that we would send out. Yeah.
So if I was Robert's Plumbers, I would advertise.
And you're doing good work, you could advertise a discount to our members through that magazine.
My brain was hurting. So how do you do it on $19 and expand to Charlotte? That's
yeah, exactly. We were raising money as we went, but we got to 1,000 members in Columbus within the first year.
So that was $19,000 a year.
Yeah.
And you were paying when you were paying yourself?
I was. I did like to eat. I wasn't earning much, but I was being paid.
So what would you say to people? Because I think, as you say, the startup or that part is the make or break. What kept you going, and what advice would you have for somebody who is afraid of that period? Because, no matter how many times I start, if you're thinking about starting a business, this is the point that throws either people don't start or they get kicked in the teeth and come home, right?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. So one, I remind people, because I talk to people all the time. They're looking at starting a business at various stages of their life. There was a little bit of kind of ignorance is bliss being 22 starting a business, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't have a lot to lose. I think you have to be realistic about how hard it's probably going to be, and make sure that you're prepared for that. I think secondly, when you're starting a business, it's really about the people you surround yourself with, because, there's, in those days that it's not going well, having a really good support system, and smart people that can help you see the long-term strategy is going to be important, because sometimes you can get so worn down by the day-to-day. I didn't sell a membership today. And you kind of forget the fact, what we're trying to do is X. We're trying to get to here. Finding local service providers is hard in Columbus. It's the 50th largest city in the country. It's going to be harder in every city bigger than that. And, we knew that we liked a recurring revenue business, which we knew was going to scale and build upon itself, but it was going to take time. And you need people, you need support folks around you that are going to remind you of that process. Otherwise, you can really get yourself rat-holed on kind of the challenge or the failure of the day.
Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki of the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking to Angie Hicks. She's the co-founder of Angie's List, and she's talking about what it takes to start, the rejection, the dark holes I'm sure I went into at least, and Kim and I have gone into, but how we keep going. But there's another stage is how you go from small to big. Any comments, Kim?
Well, I love this story, and Angie, thank you so much, because you're touching on a lot of things that we talk about at Rich Dad, and one of the first things is when you're starting a business, the purpose of a business is to solve a problem, and you and Bill saw this problem of having good, reliable local homeowner services that nobody else provided, and you went out and did that. That, along with you had a mentor in Bill, which, of course, we talk about, too. So I'd like to just go a little bit more, because you talked about, knocking on the doors and going through these tough times. And was there ever a time where you really felt, I'm not doing it, I'm going to quit, this is it, I've had it, I'm giving up?
Was that yesterday?
Oh. Put a little pep talk you have in your head all the time, right? When you're starting a business. So yeah, I think one of the stories and one of the moments I probably remember most is, I was having one of those weeks, days, whatever it was, and I called Bill up, and I was like, hey, we need to let's get together and chat. And I, to this day, I commend him for being smart enough to know that he did not want to have that meeting in my little 8x10 office. He suggested, hey, let's meet at the coffee shop down the street. So we meet down there, and I was just kind of at my wit's end, and we sat down, and I just started crying. I was just like, and literally, so he started talking, and kind of giving me that pep talk that I needed. And at the end, he's like, I think you probably had things you wanted to say. If you want to get together again, we can get together again. And all I could muster was, I'm not going to quit. And he likes to tell the story where he was like, great, why don't you get back to work then? I've done my job here. But it's like those moments where you just like, there wasn't anything that was going to, that nothing really changed in kind of that process, but just knowing you're not alone in the process, I think is a big factor, and knowing that someone's cheering for you. Because, like works hard, and you need that support network.
Two questions. What did you find that said, I'm not going to quit? Where did it come from? And second of all, what happened after that?
Yeah. So, I think, kind of where does that come from? I think that's just like I've just inherently in my personality an incredibly committed, loyal person. So I think that's part of it. Like the thought of letting someone down, is kind of the worst thing. I'm kind of that's for me, and kind of, hey, Bill and I were friends, and the thought of letting him down or the people, that put the initial money into the business, that weighed heavy on me, and that was something I took very seriously. I think that plays a big role. Kind of what happened from there. Soon after that, we decided door to door wasn't for us, and that we were going to put some money behind actually doing some marketing. And that, kind of, while the days weren't fantastic after that, just the drastic comparison for me, just in general, was enough to kind of to bring some energy back into the process.
And so then, Angie, so all of this is, and again, I think people don't realize that you started all of this well before there was any internet. How did technology come into it? How did the internet come into it?
Sure. So we got to we put our website up in 1998, I guess it was. 99 maybe.
And this is when everybody's just experimenting with websites,
yeah,
right?
everyone is. Like
we don't know what we're doing.
Some college guys down the street. I think we paid them $1,000 to make this little website for us. And for us, we knew that in our process, the internet wasn't going to define us, but we knew it was going to be an incredible accelerator and a way for consumers to be able to interact. Think about it. Do you want to listen to me read reviews to you, or would you like to read them yourself? Might be a lovely conversation we have, but for most consumers, they'd rather just be able to read on their own. So we put that site up, and then then the internet bubble happened. The internet boom was in the process of happening there, and there were lots of people coming into our space, and the question became like, hey, do we have the right model?
So people were competing with you at that point?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. There's been waves of competitors into the space over the years. And the question was okay, they're taking it from a different angle. They are free to consumers, companies pay to be listed, and we were we kind of evaluated where we were, and we liked our business model, and we stuck with it at that time, but that could have been a deal breaker back then. But what we realized was, they were giving information to consumers for free. We were actually we actually had an easier time with the service providers because we were actually having them pre-screened by the consumers. So selling them advertising after we were already delivering value to them was more of an upsell than a cold call.
I understand you left for Harvard at that time. Is that correct?
I did. So I left at the beginning of 1999.
And what was the reason for that?
I took an 18-month leave to get my MBA, and at that point we were at the point where the business was in 4 markets, and it was time to start building out a management team. And so the board had started a search for a CEO.
So why did you think it was important to go to Harvard at this time?
I think for me, when I look back on it, it was an important break for me. I think everyone needs kind of a break from startup, and it was an opportunity for me to step away, kind of learn a lot, but at the same point kind of refresh.
That's actually a pretty good idea because it stimulates your mind and you expand. Huh?
Yeah, I think back on it, so Bill ended up joining the business at that time as CEO. So, in many ways, it was the perfect outcome. It's hey, it's not, it's my co-founder stepping in, so it was a very comfortable transition. And I had been exposed to so many things at a young age that it was you're drinking from the fire hose. You're manage people? I don't manage people. My resume before this was employee of the month at Ryan's Steakhouse one summer,
So how was the Harvard MBA for you? Did you know sometimes more than your professors?
No. I was always learning. For me, it was a great experience to really kind of take real world experience and apply it to other situations, other experiences, and really kind of formulate just better thinking around business ideas. But there were certainly times, I think I remind myself sometimes of hey, managing people is a talent that always needs to be improved and learned upon, and kind of what sounds great in strategy doesn't always execute perfectly when you're dealing with people. It's like I remember being in a class one time, and the class was kind of ready to say, "Oh, we need to cut expenses. Let's reduce our staff by 10%."
Jeez.
And I'm like, have you fired someone before?
Oh, God. Amen, amen, amen. You haven't lived until you.
Those are real things.
Yeah,
Those are real things. Those are people. These are people. These are not just. This is not just a story you're writing.
Right.
So being able to, kind of marry those two together was a great experience.
It's not a multiple guest test.
Yeah.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we're talking to Angie Hicks, co-founder of the world famous, or United States famous, Angie's List. And she's talking about what it takes to go from college kid to startup, to grown up, to MBA program, to learning. And now she has like 3 million people on Angie's List, and still a lot of competitors and a lot of growth in there, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So this is my challenges. When I was in my MBA program, I sat there and I just revolted, because I just didn't like it, because this is not real world. So did you ever run into that conflict inside it? This is theory, but not real world.
Well, I think it's important to understand the theory so that you can kind of make sense of the real world. The real world's always going to make it messier, right? But being able to understand kind of, the thinking and the logic behind different strategies is an important aspect. And, it's never going to look like it does in the textbook, but having that process and that critical thinking capability is important to apply.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, though. It's called Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
Did you feel like that sometimes?
I think that was where you were going. Yeah.
I just love that movie because sometimes I think I'm Rodney Dangerfield's alter ego, and when he sat there and he says, "No, that's not the way you do it. You have to grease the guy or something like this," I just cracked it up.
Well, and that's why it makes sense to me that a lot of times people just go right to MBA program with no real world experience, but you're out there in the real world building a business, and you're actually being able to really evaluate the information as useful or not useful. I think you probably did your classmates a big service too with your interactions.
Yeah, and I encourage. I actually, whenever people ask for advice about business school, I always encourage them to work for a few years, because it's like you don't. Like, you come out of college, you're very book smart. You
Yes.
need to get the real world smarts. You take your GMAT. I encourage you when you're fresh out of college, because you're gonna be really good at the GMAT at that point. But then,
well, and you talk a lot.
Business school for a few years down the road.
Yeah, and because you talk, and this is what we strongly believe in, that oftentimes you have to step into the unknown. You have to go places you've never been before. And that's something that I think a lot of people are afraid of or scared to do, but that's part of your success, is you learn from the failures and you're willing to go where you haven't been before.
Yeah, because people will ask, like, "Hey, what's your biggest failure?" And I'm just like,
One last week.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I fail every day. Like, that's how you learn, and those are the opportunities. If you're not willing to take the risk to fail, then you're not. Then you're probably not taking enough risk.
Exactly.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. We're talking to Angie Hicks, and we're talking about what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And our guest today is Angie Hicks. She is a co-founder of Angie's List. You see her on television all the time. She's inspiring me. She's reminding me of some of the hard times we've had, but why it was important to keep going. How do you keep going through the darkest of times? And Kim, why don't you tell them about how you had $2 a week just to survive at one time?
Well, it's just like Angie's saying, that you have your tough times, you have your dark times, and as we were building our business, sometimes, Robert, you were off traveling and teaching, and I was back in San Diego and with the business, and there was times, and one time specifically, I had about $2. I had $2, and it had to last me 5 days. And somehow I had to eat, and thank God there was the taco stand down the street, and they had cheese quesadillas, and it was like 89 cents for a cheese quesadilla, and that's what I lived on. And you know what? And because Angie had talked about this too, sometimes those dark times, that was one of the times where I went, maybe it's time I just go get a job. And so very quickly, I saw this write up in the paper, this photographer, because I love photography, and I read this article. I'm like, I know I can bring him exactly what he needs. I'm going to go talk to him. He needs me. And I went down there and I sold myself, and he's like, I need you. And I'm like, yes, yay. He goes, but I have no money. Can you work for free? I'm like, oh, no, thank you.
As I said, big difference between classroom entrepreneur programs and real-life entrepreneur programs.
But that was also that defining moment, too, that you talked about, Angie, where I recommitted to the business. I went, no, this is a sign. Get back to work. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about something very important for most entrepreneurs, especially if they're sitting at 9 to 5. I don't have any money. I mean, did you have tons of money? And if you didn't, then how did you raise money? And then how did you go public? So capital is always a very important subject.
Yes.
Right. I think in kind of understanding how much money you need and when you need it is incredibly important for an entrepreneur, because you want to have you want to go into that process not feeling desperate. So we raised, when we first started the business, we raised about $50,000 to last us the first year from, kind of friends of Bill's effectively. And I remember going in and being introduced to one of the investors who gave us $10,000, and so, Bill's like teeing me up like, hey, going to go sell him, make him feel confident. And, as we ended the conversation, he looked at Bill and he was like, good luck. I've already written this off.
Was that $10 or 10,000?
10,000. I was like, obviously, maybe I need to work on my pitch. But I think, kind of making sure that you know who you're raising money from, and you value them and kind of what they bring to the team, because I think in the early days, those investors have a very loud voice in what you're doing and how you're doing things. So kind of making sure you're particular about who you're bringing into the mix is a smart thing to do, because they can bring a lot of insight. I mean, our early investors, we would meet once a month for a board meeting. And, they gave, back to the kind of having good people around you. I mean, that was an important part of the process for me, is kind of knowing those people and knowing I was learning from those smart people is great. And then, we ended up developing, kind of raising money just as we, kind of just in time but not too late kind of thing. And we had a really good angel investor that supported the business for a long time.
How much did the angel chip in?
Millions over kind of the course of probably a decade or so. And
that's not an angel, that's God.
We didn't end up picking up venture capital until 2008. And it was actually, we kind of came on the radar of the bigger venture capital firms, and they and kind of being in Indiana, that was a little unusual. So we got we ended up taking investment from a firm out of San Francisco.
So they came to you.
They came
knocking at your door.
Yeah, and it was and it was at a time where we could have, because of the way the business worked, it was really about how fast we wanted to grow, as to whether we needed to burn capital in that scenario, and it was an opportunity for us to grow faster. But also, but we were also in a position that we could say yes or no, and which allowed us to be more selective as to who we picked. And ended up bringing on a great partner.
So what's the difference between an angel investor, friends and family, angel, and then venture capitalists? What's your distinction between the three?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like friends and family is literally like, I'm going to get some money for my Aunt Susie, and angel investors are usually, I would classify them as the folks that that have experience investing in smaller companies, and are bringing insight into the organization, can help you kind of bring the right players to the table. It can be especially helpful in helping you recruit, for example. And then you graduate to venture capital from there.
What is venture capital versus an angel?
A lot of times an angel's investing their personal money, and in a venture capital firm is a firm.
Like private equity guys.
Private equity firm, exactly.
Are there risks involved with venture capital?
Absolutely. From both sides of the story, I guess. Yeah. You want to make sure that you've got a venture firm that that aligns with the team as to kind of where the business is going, and that's going to be a good partner. That's where kind of having a West Coast venture firm was incredibly insightful. I used to say, like, hey, we get to have the advantages of being in California without the distractions of being in California.
So as I said, one of the goals of many entrepreneurs is to take their startup and take it public on a exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange and stuff like that. So I've taken 3 public now, and it's something I wouldn't do again, but I was worth the experience. So why did you go public, and what's been your experience of it?
For us, it was an opportunity to raise additional capital for the business to be able to continue to expand and grow at a faster pace. I guess for me, I viewed it as a financing kind of opportunity. I know that, for many, it's one of those, culminating moments in the business, but for many ways, it's like it changes the way the company operates, especially the finance team. It changes their world a lot. But, as far as what we wanted to accomplish and what we were tackling, it was an event. It passed, and we were back to growing the business and focusing on making our business is relevant and enticing to both consumers and service companies.
So what did you learn by going public? Or what would you caution somebody on?
No, you're certainly going to open yourselves up to just, it's a lot more rigor around reporting and things like that. If you've had venture funding kind of leading into it, you've probably gotten used to that. I think that's one thing that we learned as an organization early on. And one of the advantages we had by being so old is in quotations, the business was old when we went public, right? We had been around for 15 years or so before we went public. So we had more of that rigor. I see, when you see companies that are a year or 2 years old or 3 years old that are going through that process, it's a much bigger learning curve for them as far as kind of getting that structure put in place. Once
again, it's Robert Kiyosaki of the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is Angie Hicks. She's a co-founder and current CMO of Angie's List. And she's talking about what it takes to go from college student to startup, to growing business, going back to Harvard, to going to angel funding, venture capital, and going public. So for all of you who desire to be entrepreneurs or dream of it and you think it's just one day you wake up and you're public, we have news for you today. So anyway, I want to ask Kim any questions for Angie.
Well, I want to just emphasize one point, and then I do have a question. So there was one point you mentioned, Angie, when you talked about when you were raising money from, these were like angel investors, and some of the investors you were raising money from, one of the criteria was that they were smart people and they were business knowledge, and you would learn from them, which I just want to reiterate that point because I think it's very important to our listeners. Sometimes they think, I'm just going to raise money and take people's money and I'll just do my own thing, or I'll just, I'm smart enough. But
and buy a new car.
Yeah, but I think that was so smart that you raised money from people, accepted money from people who became mentors for you.
You want to, they become such an important part of your organization that you want to make sure that you've got a good fit. And I think sometimes people jump to an opportunity to take money without evaluating that side of things, and that can that can be challenging down the road. You might have different philosophies on where the business should go and things like that. That you want to be able to make sure you have a good relationship, that you can be able to work those things out and come out with what's best for the business.
Absolutely. So then, let's move forward. Now you're a public company and you're doing really well, and Barry Diller comes knocking at your door. And Barry Diller says, I'll offer you, I think it was like $500 million for your business. And you said, no. How come?
Sure. As a public company, we always have to be open to value creating opportunities, but it was also at a time when we were in the process of laying out our profitable growth plan. And we wanted to be able to lay that out for folks to be able to see what the opportunities were. And we've since done that, and we're in the process of executing on that plan.
So the money wasn't that important from Barry Diller then?
For us, we want to make sure we're doing what's right for the shareholders and for the business. And we wanted to make sure that we were, kind of showing all options, and that's what we were in the process of doing.
And that's really what I want to get across to people, is that there is a fiduciary, moral, and legal and ethical responsibility to being where you are today. And I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of people today are using an IPO, initial public offering, to exit, not to stay there and grow the company. So you had a better growth plan, which is a true entrepreneur. So do you have any tips today for, let's say, a 22-year-old aspiring entrepreneur or a small entrepreneur, small business owner who wants to grow? Any tips for them today?
Well, I think, the first thing is, kind of think about a business that's going to be, that's going to resonate in really solving a problem, which is, one of your key points as well. Our idea, we actually had an idea that was already being operated by another company in Indianapolis, a little business in Indianapolis that had been around for 20 years. And we saw an opportunity to take that and make it a much larger scale. Helping people find great plumbers is not some, kind of crazy, wild new idea, but it's a very important, simple thing that makes people's lives easier. And finding that information was very difficult for consumers, and that's our approach. So finding a business model that can answer that question: do consumers care? Do service companies care? That's an important element of it. And then, staying relevant with them. I think Angie's List is a perfect example. A business has been around for 20 years. We are continually, kind of reinventing ourselves and staying relevant with our customers. And I think, our recent rollout of our freemium, membership model, where we have a free offering and then premium tiers on top of that, is an example of us, responding to, kind of how millennial homeowners are viewing businesses, who can help them find help around the home. And that was an important part for us as well. So, don't be afraid to question the way things have always been done.
So obviously you're doing a lot of things right, and I'm so impressed on how you do keep reinventing yourself. Starting from door to door to going to different cities to starting with a little website. Then you get very successful, and now you still online have to reinvent yourself because you have other markets out there. You have other competition. I am so impressed, and I just really want to congratulate you on the reinvention and all the success.
So, Angie, we could keep going for hours. This is one of my favorite subjects. But anyway, I want to thank you and congratulate you, and more, really, really say thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Also, especially with this program with Angie's List, if you're a budding entrepreneur, I would listen to this program 2, 3, 4, 5 times, because then you'll pick up little hints, because she gave you just a litany, a whole checklist of what you go through to go from startup or from student to a public company. And each one is a growth phase. So please listen to this program again with Angie and discuss it with your friends. And now we're going to Ask Robert, and you can submit your questions to AskRobert@richdadradio.com. So what's the first question, Melissa?
Our first question today comes from Mike in Reno. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert, what's your advice for a new entrepreneur who isn't supported in my efforts by my family and friends?
Well, let me just say this. If you can't handle your family and friends, I don't know if you have what it takes. Second thing is this. If that's your biggest obstacle, you should be an employee. Not everybody should be an entrepreneur. I should really be clear on that, because if that's a problem to you, you have no idea what's coming down the road. Right, Kim?
Yeah. And, again, I'm going to reiterate, listen to this program again, because Angie talked a lot about this, that if you're not around supportive, like-minded people, and her investors, people that put money into her company, became her mentors and her teachers. So your job, Mike, is to find people that will support what you want to do, given it's a good idea, and surround yourself with people. Don't focus on who's not supporting you. Go find people that will support and will give you some advice and will mentor you.
Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Robert in Hungary. Favorite book, Rich Dad Guide to Investing. He says, in some of your radio shows, for example, with Mr. L. Arian, you mentioned that up to 30% of your savings should be kept in cash in times of crisis or when cash is king, while in others you declare that savers are losers. You should use almost all of your money to create debt and produce assets. Could you further explain this contradiction and what to do when the next big crisis hits?
That's a great question, but I didn't say keep 30% of your money in cash. I never say that. That was Muhammad L. Arian's position. Remember, everybody's got a point of view, and everybody's point of view is dependent upon their abilities to do certain things. So since I'm fairly confident with this Angie's List program, she can raise capital. So if you can't raise capital, save money. But I'm fairly confident I can raise money. Making money, raising capital, I've done it so many times. I've gone through the hard times. So I don't really need cash. I like to move my cash as fast as possible into income-producing assets. Now, if you have no skill, like that last guy who called in, you can't sell his mom and dad. Keep cash. Right, Kim?
Well, we talk about the three sides of the coin, and that's what we do at the Rich Dad Radio Show, is we give you different points of view so you can make your own decision. Now, you look at Alarian, he's a stock and bonds guy. That's what he is,
No,
right?
he's a bonds guy. Big difference between stocks.
Okay, but he's paper assets. And I've heard many people say if you're only in paper assets, that this might be a time to keep cash. We're in real estate, and we're going to keep doing real estate. So you got to take all of these different points of view and make your own decision.
And I'll tell you what Warren Buffett said in 2010. He says, get out of cash and go into an asset. In other words, get out of holding cash. And I don't think people understand the reasons we say that. So if you understand the reasons, and the reason we say that is because right now interest rates are sub-zero. Why would you hold cash? They're printing money so fast, they're trying to give it away, and you're trying to hold on to cash? So my point here is financial education is understand the reasons people say something. Muhammad Al-Arian's a man I respect tremendously, very smart man, but he's a bond guy. Bond guys are debt guys. I'm not a bond guy. Buffett is a stock guy. And Buffett said get out of cash in 2010 and get into assets. Right now it's 2016. I don't want to hold cash. So there's reasons for that. So you can find out your own reasons and you can decide what you should do is best for you. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Hector in Seattle, Washington. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, I'm 25 years old and I'm starting my journey to become rich. You say increasing my financial IQ is important and that I need to learn how to manage the information I get. How do you do that aside from hiring professional advisors?
A good question. The first thing I would do is listen to this program with Angie for about 10 times. And you'll get some ideas because repetition is how you'll learn. Look, it's really, you never have all the answers. That's why to the guy who couldn't sell his mommy, he's got big problems. He's got emotional problems. He's got courage problems. Those can be overcome. I overcame them. Everybody overcomes them. But the point here is this. If you sit in schools and you go from textbooks, you're not going to learn anything. You've got to go and do something. You can't play golf reading a textbook. There's only one way you can become a golfer is pick up a golf club and start swinging, right, Kim?
You gotta go do something. Even if you take $10 and put it into some investment, $10, at least you're going to get smarter because you're going to follow that money. You just got to get in the game.
Also, I would watch the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. So, next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Jyoti in India. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So how would you enhance your financial knowledge as a student or someone who's just starting out?
Well, that's a pretty big question. I would listen to this program 5 or 6 times also. Other thing, you're going to enhance it by going into the unknown. Unknown is where you learn. And most people, especially school teachers, are afraid of the unknown. They like job security. If you want job security more than anything else, you're probably not going to increase your financial IQ.
So I would say this too to Jyoti from India, and thank you for listening, and thank you for the question. Your student, I would just go to richdad.com as a start. You can play the cash flow game for free. There's all sorts of free resources. Plus, go get Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Go get Rich Woman. Go get the cash flow quadrant, and then take little tiny steps and start putting some of these things into practice. That's why we're here. That's why we're here, to increase the financial IQ.
I would watch Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. No, you'll get 2 points of view out there. You have these school teachers who, in my opinion, most of them are terrified of making mistakes. So they sit there in their little ivory towers in their brain, and they think knowing the right answer is all you need. That's not the way it works in the real world. I'm not saying teachers are bad people. They're just different human beings. So if you're going to learn, learning takes place in the unknown, and there's lots of unknown out there. Next question.
Our next question comes from Jordan in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. She says, I know I need to increase my ability to sell. Can you recommend any programs to learn how to become a better salesperson?
Well, I could recommend our friend Blair Singer's book, Sales Dogs, because, again, everybody's a different style. You can tell by my style is very different than Kim. When I sell, I come at it very strong most of the time. But I also started off very afraid, terrified of selling. So I got a job with Xerox, and I knocked on doors, not eating for a long time. If you don't sell, you don't eat. So most people cannot get a job at Xerox because their pay is too high. But anyway, join a network marketing company.
Yeah,
The best thing about network marketing is they'll coach you, they'll guide you. Stay with them for 5 years, and you'll grow emotionally, internally.
I mean, when before I started my own business, I joined a network marketing company, and for that exact reason, so that I had to learn how to sell. And you get very creative because I had no other income. If I didn't sell, I didn't eat. So you get very creative on how you sell because, first of all, when you join a network marketing company, you're going to go to your friends and family, and that's really easy, and that's going to run out pretty fast because then you've got to go face to face with people you don't know and actually sell them on your products and services. So network marketing was a great step for me.
So I was very fortunate to get a job with Xerox, and I spent 3 weeks in Leesburg, Virginia, going through sales training. But when sales training was over, I still had to hit the road and go, just as Angie had to do. So I would suggest people listen to Angie's story 3, 4, 5 times. Just listen to it in the background, things like this. It'll sink into your head. Because the reason I mentioned Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield is the reason most school teachers are teachers is they're afraid of what Angie had to do. And I think that is a defining line. And every day I get up and I go, and if you can't do that, keep your daytime job. So I was just in one of my favorite countries, South Africa, and we have a group of students out there. And this very attractive, beautiful woman, African woman, stood up and she said, "Hey, I did what you said. I went and bought a house, da-da-da-da-da. I rented it out, and I'm losing money. What do you have to say?" And all I have to say is congratulations. You effed up. The good thing about effing up means you did something. Now you can sit back and reflect on it and say, what didn't I know? And as I said, the problem with school is they think knowing the right answer is all you need to know. That's not real world. Real world was to step into the dark room and you hope to find a light and turn it on. When you make a mistake, that's God telling you you effed up. Learn something from this. And if you cannot do that, keep your daytime job. But that's all there is, ladies and gentlemen. Step into the dark room. If you don't want to step in the dark room, sit in your cubicle working 9 to 5.